Let's unpack several patterns around name resolution in Azure. There are 4 distinct patterns. Let's quickly touch upon them with an example. Azure provides default DNS server which is 168.63.129.16 for the Azure hosted workload. If workload is not hosted in Azure, you cannot make use of this server. On the diagram, scenario is virtual network in Azure having a CIDR of 192.168.0.0/16 can talk to the Azure DNS without any additional configuration. You just create the virtual network and you get name resolution capabilities provided by Azure DNS. When you create a private endpoint, Azure automatically assigns a private IP address within a specified virtual network. This private IP is then registered in an Azure managed private DNS zone for the associated service and replace the public DNS entry in your virtual network. Azure services such as Azure Storage, SQL Database, and Cosmos DB can be accessed over private endpoints by setting up private DNS zones in Azure. In the example diagram, storage account has a private endpoint created for the Azure file. Virtual network contacts Azure DNS and then Azure DNS forward the query to the Azure managed private zones for the Azure file. You should ensure that there is a VNet link though with Azure managed private zone for the Azure file. This is the design pattern you should understand very closely. Simple but complex if you overlook. First, on-premise has a DNS server and you cannot query Azure DNS from there. See the red cross sign on the diagram. And this is what people try to implement using DNS forwarding, thinking that they can forward to the Azure DNS from on-premise server. This does not work. Rather, what do? You have a DNS running in cloud. See the virtual network having one DNS VM. You can then do the DNS forwarding to the Azure DNS. This is the pattern that you should be adopted. This is how your on-premise now can resolve the private endpoint for the Azure file as shown on the diagram. In this design pattern, you make use of the Azure DNS private resolver service rather than spinning up the VM for DNS. This is the managed service and we require its own network for inbound and outbound connection. That's pretty much in this video. Hope now you have a good understanding around name resolution.